Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our Strengthening Operational Resilience through Modern PAM and Identity Security, brought to you by CommSec and our partner DORA. My name is DORA Reynolds. I'm the Marketing Manager here at CommSec, and I'm delighted to have you here with us. Joining me today, I have Scott Shields, Solutions Engineer at DORA, who will be leading the main part of today's session. So today's session will run for approximately 40 minutes and time left at the end for Q&A and details on how to get a demonstration, a one-to-one demonstration. So feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A chat box as we go. And then stay with us at the end as we'll be running a live quiz with the chance to win a Ninja pizza oven. So keep your thinking caps on. And just one caveat for the quiz, we need a verified work email for the winner to claim the prize. Very important that we obviously verify identities these days. So let me move on to the agenda. So here's a quick look at how things are going to run today. I'll open up with a short introduction and then hand over to Scott for our main session. After that, we'll have a short demonstration, followed by Q&A, and we close out then with the quiz. So before we dive in, I just want to set the scene. So last month, the NCSE issued advisory following the global targeting of Fortinet firewalls and VPN gateways, an incident that's now known as FortiBleed, quite an impactful name. So basically a database of credentials was leaked following brute force, and credential stuffing attempts were made against internet-facing FortiGate and VPN portals. So this is a timely reminder of how quickly a single credential flaw can cascade into serious operational risk, giving attackers a route to critical systems through exposed access paths and privileged accounts. So that leads us nicely on to what you'll learn today. So over the next 40 minutes or so, we'll explore how organizations can move towards identity-first security models. And we can see the key themes on screen here, from DORA to NIS2 to hidden risks, standing access, just-in-time access, and zero standing privilege, and of course AI governance. Scott will be bringing us through all those topics. And then I just wanted to zoom out here for a second because everything we discussed today will sit under this umbrella concept of access control. And as Bruce Schneier puts it, access control is about making sure authorized people are able to do whatever they're authorized to do, and that everyone else is not. Funny enough, that book was recommended to me recently, and I think it's a must read for everybody working in cybersecurity and risk. And that brings me up to to a line that sums up today's session rather well, that hackers don't have to hack in anymore, they can log in. So what's under attack? Identity is under attack, and the numbers back this up. According to the latest Verizon Data Breach Investigations report, credential abuse remains one of the leading initial access vectors. And when you consider all instances of credential abuse at any point in the breach, it sits on top at 39%. So identity, quite simply, is under attack. Just a quick word on who we are. CommSec is a specialist ICT security partner or cybersecurity managed service provider. We're an Irish company supported by our team here in Dublin, running a 24/7 managed SOC. We work with clients across Ireland, the UK, EU, Asia, North America, spanning software, financial services, logistics, and public bodies. And we align our clients to standards including ISO 27001, NIST, and CIS controls. We deliver end-to-end cybersecurity services across our 4 pillars. So I mentioned the managed SOC already. Our security testing, which includes penetration testing, vulnerability management across web apps and cloud. Professional services, including CISO and DPO as a service. And we also do gap assessments to some of the standards we mentioned already today. And then our final pillar is under solutions. So vendor security solutions, we work with the world's best partners, including Delinea, who are kind enough to sponsor today's webinar. Some of our valued clients, so we work a lot alongside some excellent organizations. You'll recognize some of the logos here, including the Irish Times, Primeline Group, Skymetrics, and many others across different sectors. And then poll time. So we're going to just kick things off with a quick poll. So just let me load this one up for you. Share. Oh, sorry. Launch. This will pop up. So poll should be visible to everybody. What is the biggest identity-related blind spot in your organization today? Standing privilege access that is never switched off, unmanaged third-party or supply chain access, shadow AI and unmanaged machine identities, or not sure. That's why I'm here today. So let's get those answers in. We can come back to the answers of that later on in the webinar. So I think we have enough time to answer that now. So we'll move on to Scott. If you'd like to share your screen, Scott, and kick off.
Yeah, thanks, Dara.
Hopefully I've set the scene there for you.
Beautifully. You see my screen okay now?
Thanks very much. Yeah, all good. Go ahead.
Fantastic. So thanks, Dara. And yeah, just again, thanks everyone for joining. It's a privilege to be able to speak to you today around operational resilience through modern PAM and identity security. So again, Scott Shields, Senior Solution Engineer with Delinea. I'm going to run through a few bits and pieces here. And of course, as you mentioned, if there's any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We can discuss them afterwards. Very briefly, just a little bit from Delinea on who we are, what we do. Delinea is an identity security control plane covering both human, machine, and AI identities. And I'm going to discuss this in a little bit more detail today around how exactly that we do this. So with identities, of course, continuous discovery through access to cloud, on-premise, hybrid environments, and be able to help you understand your risk and control what happens next. So when we think about the evolving security landscape, first of all, to help set the scene, we're well aware now that particularly, with people working from home, etc., that the traditional network perimeter is fading and identity is now, as Dara had clearly very well set the scene at the start there, that the identity is now the front line of defense. Things driving this shift are, of course, cloud adoption, hybrid work models, rise in identity-based cyber threats. You can look at any analyst report to see, as the stats at the top of the webinar had suggested there as well, that there's a massive increase in the rise in identity-based cyber threats. Stricter compliance and regulatory mandates. I'm going to focus a little bit on this as well, particularly around DORA and NIS2 compliance that maps to many identity and privilege access controls within the environment, making it much easier to meet those compliance mandates. And of course, for anyone working towards a zero trust framework, this is just helping you reshape that security strategy so that you can take a new approach, a fresh approach, to be able to secure access in a perimeterless world. So when we think about the there's a tongue twister, regulatory you know what? It's on the screen. You can read it. I'd say how DORA and NIS2 are reshaping identity security. Regulatory reality. There we go. I was determined to get there in the end. What we're talking about is, of course, DORA and NIS2 are reshaping the identity requirements. What you tend to find with these compliance mandates, a bit like cyber insurance policies, if you've ever had to complete one of that, is they very quickly get to the source of what causes real risk in an organization. There's nothing flashy or sexy about it. It really boils down to how access is governed and who has access to it, how the keys to the kingdom are protected. DORA has been on the go for a while now, but it's actually coming up to the point where users are having to struggle to do this register of information that they have to do at the start. Most organizations will still describe this as work in progress based on their internal research. And so there's still a step to be done there. There's still an element of work and tooling required in order to help reach the full instance of compliance there. With NIS2 in itself, there is the October deadline that's looming. And so the board level conversations are now around identity-based security as well, where previously it might have been just, from a security perspective. The whole thing is now that identity risk is actually becoming a board level issue, which is, giving them something to think about in the context of the regulatory penalties that are looming. Effectively, 2% of turnover, a flat fine, or whichever's higher. By the way, the October deadline, if you weren't aware, is because there's been a few over the last year or so. This is the one where entities must have adopted, I want to get the wording of this one right, the technical and operational organizational measures to manage risk related to their information and network systems. So part of what we do is make this a little bit easier to manage. Like I said, many of the controls and a lot of regulatory and compliance mandates map exactly to privileged and identity access as the source of a lot of problems in customers' environments. And when we look at the hidden risks around standing privilege and how this translates to business risk, there's many issues posed by standing privilege. And I think this is very well understood in the industry, but how you get to reducing this standing risk is not. As Dara said at the top, attackers don't hack in anymore. Effectively, they just need to log in, whether it's through social engineering, any number of methods that they can access stolen credentials to exploit and move rapidly within the system. This is a couple of additional stings in the tail as well, because it undermines the least privilege approach and expectations within DORA and ICT risk management pillar, but also it's slow to catch. It's slow to bring to the surface these types of incidents. If a bad party or an attacker is masquerading in the environment as a trusted user, it becomes very, very difficult, much more difficult than like a 0 day to be able to identify what's going wrong and rectify that access. But it's just a question of process and a little bit of tooling. So a big part of what I do is try to speak to organizations on a daily basis around where they fit and what practical steps they can do next to reduce their risk to operations and architecture from an identity standpoint. And they broadly fall into this category of what we call the PAM maturity model, whereby if you're doing nothing, right, if you've basically there isn't even a simple credential manager in place, etc., then, or if we've got non-standardized passwords and there's no centralized policy around identity security, then it's kind of like a ticking time bomb, right? We call this danger zone. Bad stuff is going to happen. It's not a question of if, it's more a question of when. Now, a lot of companies will then gravitate into a little bit more, dip their toe into discovery and vaulting methodology, whereby now there is policies in place. We're rotating credentials. There's a bit of discovery. You're putting it out there across the network, helping identify, domain admins, admin accounts, service accounts with privilege, things like that. And we've got some policies around securing remote access to them. But still, we're not quite into the realms of just-in-time elevation, being able to establish alternate admin accounts, or even Kerberos manipulation to elevate the user identity-based elevation rather than checking out a credential anymore, right up to full zero standing privileges and enforcing host-based session and auditing, which is also a requirement for a lot of insurance and compliance mandates as well. It used to be the case just a few years ago now that if you were logging into a server, for example, via a PAM tool that you had MFA enabled on, that was appropriate. That was then deemed as MFA is on access to that server. This is older thinking now, because what a lot of the compliance and insurance mandates are asking that is host-based MFA now. So it has to be on the box that it's protected, not just on the proxy PAM tool you're using to access it. So these are important considerations around ultimately, taking practical steps to help reduce your risk to operations and to the organization in general. But this exists across multiple planes, or what we call pillars of identities as well, and organizations face different challenges across them. So one of them is the classic, the original privileged user, the IT admin, whether this is internal or externally, sourced through an MSP or contractor type. This is traditionally harder to manage because it's consistently they need different access, different privilege to manage different access needs in an evolving business that changes daily. So typically these is going to be like the domain admins, local admins, service desk, help desk type people. But again, discovery, vaulting, credential rotation can help manage that. Then there's the workforce. So this is everyone else. This is the non-techies within the organization. This is your finance team. This is your sales and marketing people, manufacturing, production workforce, whatever industry you might be in. Not to be confused as a non-privileged user, however, quite often, because they're not technical, they don't have an admin password, they often fly under the radar of management from a privileged access because of that, because they're not a techie. But quite often, especially in finance or even in sales and marketing, they're accessing customer information, private information, financial details, spreadsheets, whatever. And so these can also be managed in a separate way, but slightly more nuanced in that there tends to be many, many more workforce users than there are IT admins. So it needs to be easy to use, easy to adopt, and easy to deploy. But even more than the workforce users are the machine accounts. This can include AI, this can include service accounts and their dependencies, where they might be hiding in scheduled tasks, scripts, app pools. A lot of organizations struggle to change and rotate and manage their service account passwords because you're worried about what it might break if you change it. It might be, in a task that's underpinning a critical database or a website that might be a source of revenue to you. And there tends to be, depending on who you speak to, about 20 or up to 200 times more machine accounts than human entities within most organizations' environments. I think this largely depends on how where they are on the scale of adoption to AI within that environment, with agentic bots running around the place with admin rights. But I'll come back to that in a moment. Then there's the developer community. So this is not relevant to everyone. Sometimes the organizations don't have developer communities or it's outsourced. But these are the guys typically who they get their own category because they'll typically fight back as they legitimately need administrative credentials in environments where they're running CI/CD pipelines or making applications that need to run on operating systems, etc. And the velocity for the things that they need access to changes more, so their needs are different than the other users. But they're all can be managed, centrally, but all with slightly different nuanced policies, and they're all important to consider if we're taking an identity-first approach. Because if we try to attack the credentials that they're all using, it becomes very, very difficult to manage. So, but if we attack them as people, as identities within the organization, whether it's a CI/CD pipeline, whether it's a developer or an IT admin or an end user who just works in the company, then we can categorize it and protect it accordingly through an identity-first model. Now, one of the key things here is to be able to quantify and communicate identity risk in a way that resonates. So I speak to a lot of, it's just through, the day job, a lot of security leaders and CISO types who have, it seems to me, almost as much trouble, not just identifying, security holes and vulnerabilities, but as they do explaining them, or explaining what they are and the nature of the risk and the threat that they pose to the organization. And having a way to help more easily articulate that in board and executive leadership conversations is can sometimes be challenging, especially in an identity framework where we're talking about concepts that don't always easily resonate or are new, that don't always are not always easily understood. And then what we need to do is take some more practical approaches to eliminate standing privilege, and I'll come back on this in a moment. Secure and AI-enabled environments. Now, depending on where you're using this at the moment and how you're using it, everyone's slightly different, but it is a rapidly expanding area of AI adoption. But these accounts, depending on how they're using them, everything from just a workforce user using a little bit of ChatGPT or Claude to ask a question, is very different than users who are bringing it into their workflows now in terms of automation. Agentic AIs hooking up to your MPC servers, MCP servers, sorry, where they're then creating bots out there that are using to automate their workflow. These sometimes carry privilege and can cause problems on their own. And so what we're doing now is helping customers securely deploy this in their environment in a way that doesn't cause any of those vulnerabilities. And then what we need to do is try to align align identity and access in a cohesive strategy, a central security strategy for both, your different types of the identities I mentioned before, whether it's IT admins or end users, but also in terms of the resources and target resources that we're accessing, whether it's Linux, Unix, like AD bridging, bringing them under one roof, network devices, routers, firewall appliances, that type of thing. Just because something is in the cloud and another piece is on-prem legacy and resource, it doesn't mean that you should require a different strategy or a different tool to be able to manage it. Ultimately, the problem of the credentials existing still boils down to the same vulnerability. And so a little bit on translating this risk. So we need to bring through reporting mechanisms up to the surface these technical findings in a way that resonates. So for example, an unmanaged privileged account with a standing access to production systems can be demonstrated in a report as a single point of failure that could trigger a reportable DORA incident and personal liability exposure for the board. This isn't exaggerating a technical finding or being providing superfluous information. This is just being factually reframing it in the context of the risk that it actually is. And too often a lot of tooling will just provide the technical finding and not enough of the contextual reasoning that goes along with that. So I'll throw a couple of screenshots in here to show you exactly how we typically quantify these types of things. We can have an overall posture score that sits through all connected apps. So being able to homogenize it into one. So you might be using AWS, Azure, on-prem AD, network resources, SSH keys, etc. Different types of resources, different types of issues and teams and members accessing them. But ultimately, the problem is still the same. And so we need a way to help homogenize that into a single posture score, then a series of checks that you can work through and actually demonstrate progress without going through the raw audit information. We can also pull the same evidence into compliance information as well, whereby every check and every severity rating has a link to where it will affect different compliance mandates, whether it's like ISO or NIST or DORA, for example, MFA, any audit that comes around. You can look at exactly who did what and when and who approved it and maybe a video recording of it. It's much more difficult, to be able to define those things without an appropriate identity privileged access management solution in place. But with it, it just becomes automated. And so when we think about where to start, right? So they might be thinking, well, that's fine, Scott, but what do we do, right? It depends on where you are today at the moment. So whether there is some that maturity model I showed you earlier. If you are effectively doing nothing, the best place to start is by simply doing some discovery and vaulting your credentials, and then you can gravitate towards the just-in-time privilege after that. And so effectively what that means is you'll be looking at a tool, something like Secret Server. This is the credential vaulting and encryption tool that we provide that's at the core of the Delinea platform. Now, the users will typically log in and access this through discovery. It will automate the onboarding, the discovery and onboarding of domain admin accounts, service accounts, privileged accounts within that environment across different network resource types, and then securely delegate them back to various teams that need to, taking that least privilege methodology, right? The firewall guy only gets to see the firewalls. Your third-party contractor guy only gets to see the server that he needs to occasionally do maintenance on, that type of thing. And for anything else, there can be a request and approval process that can be automated, or if you want to justify or to manually approve their justification for it, you can do that as well through a series of workflows, session recording, auditing, monitoring, that type of thing. This is easy to get going with initially because it's just you can hook up to your SSO, you can import the tools, and you can get from nothing to something in a matter of hours really, and then delegate the responsibility back to the tool to be able to automate password rotations and things like that. Very, very quick and easy, and it's a good on-ramp into the world of identity management if there was nothing like this in place today. If there is something like this in place today and you're looking to develop into a more nuanced just-in-time elevation piece, then we can take that to the next level, because the problem, not the problem, but the limitation of true zero standing privilege of a tool like where we provide the vaulting methodology is that the credential still exists. We can check it out of the vault, we can use it even if the user never sees it, right? Because we provide secure, as you might know, invisible injection of these credentials, so the users, the admin accounts, don't have to even see or know what they are. But it still has to be there, it still has to exist. And so that's where we come to that true just-in-time elevation. And I put this screenshot in, just a little bit of fun as well, where, you know, Marty can't understand why we don't need roads, right? The car needs to go 88 miles an hour to time travel, but he's come back from the future and we don't need roads anymore. And but like with credentials, and whether it's SSH keys or passwords, it's a weird little semantic jump. You have to think, well, how can we achieve, you know, users accessing servers, infrastructure, and resources without credentials? It seems impossible, right? Like a car that needs a road, how can they do it? And of course, in a cheesy context, I'm going to replace roads with passwords here and explain how. I actually showed this slide to a couple of colleagues in the office a while back, and they didn't get the reference. They didn't know the movie, which made me feel very old. But hopefully you guys get the reference here. So how do we actually do that? How do we deploy to actually provide zero standing privilege in a world where we don't see or know or even need the credential to exist in the first place? So if there's nothing in place, then, you know, privileged user accesses the target system directly. This is just, you know, through any pre-known mechanism, RDP, SSH. An attacker can then steal the credentials through any mechanism and then access the system, whether it's social engineering, malware, phishing attack, whatever it is. However he gets it, they can just access the system. So what we do, we put them in a vault. They're then encrypted, AES-256 level encryption. Or if you're financial services, we have I say this because it's only really the big banks and financial services that have asked about it. If you need it to be quantum safe, there's a Kyber's crystals encryption algorithm that allows that to be quantum encrypted, but a little bit fancy. But standard encryption is also just fine. It makes it much more difficult for a user to be able to circumnavigate that and take it out of the vault. But then the problem becomes, how do you know that it's all in the vault, right? Discovery is great for, you know, within your network environment, but an attacker could just switch strategies and move to a system that might not be able to protect itself because it's not been discovered by your tool. And then how do we onboard that into the system? Well, we can drop an agent on there, and this is where we can provide true host-based identity-based elevation. Because first of all, for your compliance purposes and for your insurance purposes, it allows the box to protect itself, right? So like with the MFA thing, you can allow host-based MFA, host-based auditing and recording. So they don't have to access it via the PAM tool anymore. So it's great for ease of use, for onboarding, for adoption, because your users don't have to actually use the PAM tool's dinky little, you know, RDP client to access it. Users can use tools that we're always used to using. The policy is now on them. We're not checking out a credential anymore. A little bit of Kerberos manipulation under the hood that says there's a policy that says Scott is allowed to get admin on that server when he logs in. But then the problem might be we don't need Scott to have full admin on that server. You know, the administrative access is too broad. We only need him to perform a couple of tasks. This is where we can provide the granular level of elevation on that as well. And again, there's no credential to check out here. We've spoke a lot in depth with colleagues and customers about this, where, you know, it's that old one about what kind of credential, what is safer, a credential that's long, complicated, encrypted, salted, hashed, or the one that you don't need to exist in the first place. And this is where we can get to that place, true zero standing privilege, even at the point of elevation. If you're doing a sudo on a Linux box, or if you're doing, you know, like right click, run as admin, we can literally have a policy that says when Scott or any other individual user or team department, whoever you're delegating the RBAC controls, when they do that, perform an MFA check or enable session recording. Let's watch it live. Let's see what they're actually doing. This is, you know, particularly useful for third-party contractor MSP types, as it is for internal administrative access and meeting those compliance mandates. And one of the most common, pushback, or people who've never deployed it yet, is they want this slow down operations, want to, you know, create some red tape or friction, and it actually has the net effect of removing the friction from this control, because it's, you know, just-in-time elevation feels instant. a bit like credential injection from Secret Server. It feels like you have natural admin rights anyway. Even if you're doing just-in-time elevation on an endpoint, like on a Windows or MacBook. By the way, if you have anyone in the organization who has administrative access of their endpoint, in 2026, there's no reason for that to be the case anymore. We can provide endpoint application elevation where, the user there's a policy that says applications A, B, and C can be elevated, never in the context of a local administrator will a user ever log into their admin box. It's kind of a Windows problem. If that's the case, then, you can reach out, talk to myself or Dara after the call. We can fix that problem as well. But it's the same on the endpoints with the servers. We can provide that resilience without ever having used the credential and integrate that with your workflow and SIEM tools if need be as well. AI governance, conscious of the time, whizzing through this. So again, shadow AI, machine identity, agentic workflows, all hot topics, all big problems in almost every organization that I speak to. The shadow AI, the usage thing is less of a concern. That's more from a privacy and data compliance standpoint. Things that can really cause more harm are the unmanaged machine identities and agentic workflows as well. So things like API keys, service accounts, as mentioned, the AI agents that can now take their own actions. Again, if there's none of this being deployed in your organization yet, I say yet confidently because it will be coming. It is something we've integrated into our workflows, and it's massively changed the way that we all work and that a lot of our developers work. And it's just a matter of time before it filters down into other organizations in that context as well. But everyone, even depending on how you're deploying it, is still struggling a little bit with this being able to control and secure and audit the full autonomous agentic workflows and how they're integrating with various MCP servers. But the way that we act around this is through the very similar methodology. It's just zero standing privilege again, whereby the agent makes a request through a secure proxy methodology where no agent ever holds standing access between tasks. It retrieves the credential at the point of runtime every single time. So runtime authorization every time it wants to connect with something. And if it's deemed risky through risk analysis, depending on what it's trying to do, it can fall back to human approval. It can give you the guardrails you need around that to be able to safely deploy agentic AI in those environments and in align with your security policies. So how do you bring all this together? How do you, there's a lot of elements we spoke about there: endpoint application, vaulting, elevation, credential injection, secure access, remote access, third-party contractors, things like this. How do we bring it all together into a cohesive, unified strategy? Because again, you might be thinking that the problem here is we've got so many different identities, so many different endpoints and target resources, and so many questions to ask in between them. Things like where does the asset exist? What type of access do we have? Is it safe? No. Are they a trusted employee or a third party? Do we need to record and monitor this one or not? Is the access permanent or temporary? All these questions, when you need to ask them for multiple identities or multiple target resources, becomes a maze, right? You could maybe list it all out in some massive spreadsheet, but by the time you get to the bottom, 80% of it is going to be out of date. And so the context is lost and a completely new approach is required. And the identity-based or led security is actually designed to be much more fluid in that context, because now we can take a more dynamic approach. Dynamic in the sense that because the organization and access changes across multiple identities and endpoints, the policies can change with them. So the identity and context drive risk-based access to every resource, making this old privileged versus non-privileged distinction effectively obsolete. So every access identified inherently. AI-driven, of course, we're adopting this in the platform as well. We're not just helping the deployment of it. We use it with our session monitoring and auditing tools. We use it to help automate the workflow controls, things like this, to help increase the effectiveness of your admins and your workforce. And it has to be risk-based to help you understand where to focus on first, because if you have a big list of priorities, how do you know what's top of the list? How do you start? I hate to use the term low-hanging fruit, but we help bring that to the surface and say these are the areas we need to focus on first. We do this through a series of enabling technologies, and then through ultimately the Delinea platform, SaaS-based solution that can provide security across all these identities. Again, just to iterate this, that's me effectively done. Just again, we are Delinea, the identity security control plane for human, machine, and AI identity. Effectively, we can help provide these services along with CommSec through helping you understand the discovery and risk profile and what happens throughout your organization from an identity perspective. So I hope some of the information that I've shared today was useful. Please reach out if you have any questions at all. I'm sure we'd love to hear from you. But with that, I think, Dara, I hope I'm on time.
Absolutely spot on.
I got your little
Thanks
warning.
a million. Yeah,
no worries.
We'll jump into the Q&A now. If anyone has any questions, I know I have one or two anyway, so we'll see if anybody has any questions there. You can just drop them into the chat box there. I have one or two. That I can drop in myself just from watching. Okay. Okay, there's one for you, Scott. Can you see that? My team is small and admins already wear a lot of hats. Will just-in-time access create more tickets and slow us down? Or how's the approval process look like on that?
So effectively, no. So it's designed to help streamline that approach. So ultimately, the reason that ticket requests slow things down is because you're waiting on a human approval. But if the request has come from a trusted source, right? If it's trusted laptop, trusted the employee's SSO'd in, their MFA'd into a regular laptop device, there's a high trust level that that person is who they say they are. And you know that maybe they regularly access certain applications or need to deploy certain things, then you could take a policy-based approach to automate that away. It was massively useful after COVID when we went to work from home, and quite often you needed to install some home, driver or something like this, and the help desk guy would buzz through RDP into the box, do the installation, put in their admin rights. Now you can centrally allow the user to do that themselves through a policy tweak. So let them do their disk defrags, let them do their their install their drivers, things like that. So it's actually an enabler. A lot of people would think, or if it's not deployed correctly, it could be red tape and slow people down. But not necessarily. It can actually have the net effect of speeding it up and making your help and service desks much more efficient.
Great. There's a couple more there. How can we actually see what AI has access to within our organization? I think it means from like an API point of view. Yep. Do I need a tool for that?
Yeah, so this is why we provide a secure proxy methodology. I also see the one about the guard for things like ChatGPT and Gemini Copilot. So when you think about the logical flow of what these requests are doing, it's if it's in a browser-based access point, then it's a chat function, right? When they're using it as a chat function, it's relatively basic, but you can allow for web-based monitoring to be able to record that session and see what they're doing, or through keystroke analysis to be able to do command restriction on those keystrokes if they were starting to type out something that was that they shouldn't be deploying. But largely with the proxy methodology, if the request has to come through our system, and it's audited, then we'll know everything that has gone on within that interaction. A bit like the same way with Secret Server, whereby they have to check out a credential in order to access that external third-party system. Because we are the gateway, we are the authorization plane in that process, we can audit it. So you will know who has done what, whether it's a human access request or an agentic access request through a machine-to-machine type account, whether it's API integration or MCP or whatever. That's fully audited. And because the proxy methodology, we can audit that information centrally, and that's what gives us visibility of that process.
Yeah, thanks for that, Scott. And Andrew Higgs has just put another comment in there. Would it replace the likes of PureView from Microsoft, or NROC is another tool that I'm aware of that restricts AI action?
I've heard of them. I'm not overly familiar with them, so I couldn't comment on that part just yet.
I think my understanding of PureView is it's Microsoft's AI interface that basically looks at your complete environment, and it logs and details AI actions within your M365 environment, what it has access to within SharePoint, etc. So, and you can add further guardrails in there, or have different configurations there to protect you on that. So, does that help, Scott?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like very similar. I mean, a lot of different, especially Microsoft, you know, and the AI tools themselves. You know, like I know Anthropic have a whole tool system around this. And so if you're limiting it to one particular vendor, one particular AI type, then they're probably fine, to be honest. You know, the individual, you know, tools that will provide security around that could be deployable in that environment. The problem is then if they're using something else, you know, and then it becomes a case of, do you proactively block it via policy, or do you create a more holistic approach and say, well, if whatever they're using. So yeah, I'm sure it's
there's got to be hundreds of AI agents now at this stage, all trying to do different things. So you need something that's going to be overarching, not just dedicated to one vendor, I'd imagine. Exactly. Okay. So we'll finish up the Q&A with that. So this brings us to the end of our main session. So I want to thank Scott very much for that. It's been really valuable, and I'd say personally, it was a weak area of my knowledge anyway. So it was great to A, research it, and B, listen to Scott on the webinar there. So it's a really, you know, genuinely, it's a game changer for organizations trying to close that identity blind spot, but without slowing down business operations, obviously. So I know a lot of what you've covered, Scott, will have struck a chord with today's audience. So thanks again. And just to let everyone know that you can get in touch with myself afterwards, or the CommSec team, to discuss a one-to-one demonstration at your own time. And of course, you can bring your team along with that if that's of interest to you. So please get in touch. So Scott, we will do our quiz now. So thanks very much. If you need to head off somewhere, I'm sure we'll speak to you again very soon.
Yep, no problem. Thanks very much for your time, Darren. Thanks everyone else for